Hello everyone, today we're going to look at the last classical game of Magnus Carlsen. He opened with d4 and Caruana responded with d5, Queen's Gambit declined, and Magnus goes for the Catalan setup. This is what he used to play a lot in the World Championship against Caruana, so let's see how it goes. Just standard developing moves and the main line. After they both castled and finished their kingside development, he takes the pawn in the center, because Magnus can't easily win it back. So he tries to win it back with the queen, but Fabiano plays this move, so after takes, he plays b5, and this is a well-known line, which is pretty good for black, if he knows the theory. But that's not what happened, because Magnus played rook to d1, supporting his center. He's obviously still in his preparation, so he knows what he's doing. And now Fabiano defends his pawn. And maybe there now are tactics with his bishop opening up to the rook. So that's why he plays the knight to the center. The bishop hits the rook, and the knight blocks the bishop's vision. And now Magnus undermines the pawn chain of black. Black takes, and he takes back with the a pawn, because the queen now has the c file and the rook is opened up. Because if you would have taken with the queen would be staring at nothing, and the rook would also still be doing nothing. So this is the better move. Now Fabiano develops the bishop, defending the knight, getting out of the hanging rook situation, and Magnus goes bishop a3, trying to trade his bishop for Fabiano's bishop, because his bishop is very good. Could maybe go in the future to this square, and Magnus' bishop wasn't really getting out easy, so that's why Fabiano plays the bishop to d6, because he doesn't want to get taken on that square. He wants to get taken on this square, after which he probably would have taken with the pawn to kick out the knight. He has to move back, and then he could play for maybe d5 or maybe e5 with this, because then he get a central pawn and would support the opening of the position. So Magnus doesn't take, he just drops his knight back. As we see, Fabiano is out of prep and Magnus is still in his prep. So Fabiano just develops his last piece, and Magnus kicks out the knight in the center with his move e4. We have to keep in mind, Magnus is still down a pawn, but he has more active pieces with the bishops, and he has really nice central control because he has two pawns in the center. And here, great move of Fabiano, because you first want to trade the bishop before moving the knight, because otherwise there will come an avalanche in the center, and you can't take the knight because then the bishop would just draw back, and the bishop pairs better than the knight, so that's why Magnus took back. And now Fabiano drops the knight back. It looks like there's a tactic with e5, but the knight just moves back, because you think the knight is attacked and the bishop is attacked, but the knight can block again. So Magnus also develops his knight to d2 instead of to c3, because he wants to keep the queen open and maybe put also a rook on that square to fully take over the c file. And now Fabiano goes for this move a5. He wants to create an outside passed pawn defended by the rook, which will be an asset in almost every endgame. So Magnus stops the plan, because now he's just gonna win the pawn if Fabiano pushes. So he plays c5, defending the pawn, also with the queen, so it can be taken, and striking at the center. Magnus takes the pawn, and Fabiano develops the queen. So now they're equal, but Magnus is probably gonna lose this pawn. But he doesn't want to lose the pawn, so he plays b4, and Fabi just takes the pawn. Magnus trades one pair of rooks and then defends the c pawn, which we thought Fabiano was gonna win, but instead of losing the c pawn, he lost the b pawn. So now he can defend. He did give Fabiano the open file, but these knights are pressuring really nice. So Fabiano also takes the pawn again, and now Magnus moves the queen. So the pawn could be taken, but Fabiano just plays h6 because this pawn isn't going anywhere. And yeah. Oh, and the pawn couldn't be taken, by the way, because after takes, the queen has to take, and then you would lose the queen for the rook. That's why. So now Magnus takes this pawn, so they're equal in pawns, and he's also defending the pawn again. And Fabiano defends this pawn with the bishop, so it cannot be taken by anything. And now Magnus just moves his queen back to the diagonal, keeping an eye on these important central squares. And Fabiano goes to the open file again. Magnus puts his knight on the square where his queen was, so that's also a reason why he moved it back, to put his knight there, taking the bishop. Knight moves to the center, because after the take he maybe wants to take back with the knight, but he will probably do it with the queen, but just to have an eye on this square. So after takes, maybe there's even intermediate move, knight b6, forking the queen and the rook. So Magnus first kicks the knight out. The knight activates, Magnus takes the bishop, and then takes the pawn. So now Magnus is the one up a pawn. And we can see in the evaluation that he has a 0.5 position. So that's a really nice position. Now this move rook a to c1 again, stopping the pawn from moving forward, because you want to move the queen. And Magnus plays e5. You may think he's just winning because he takes the knight and the queen, same as before. The knight blocks, getting a nice central square, and Magnus plays f5, undermining the defense of the knight and also weakening the king a little bit. Great move of Fabiano, taking the rook. So the rook just drops back because it wants to stay behind the pawn and escort it as far as possible. Fabiano threatens to take the pawn, but intermediate move, because if you take now, there will be check, so you won't win a pawn. So takes first, then he takes the knight, and now he defends the pawn, and attacks this one. Fabiano just defends it, and now we're going to a position where a lot of slow improving moves will be made, with maybe where the king will be, where the rook and the queen will be, and Fabiano is also probably maybe gonna move his king to the center, blocking the pawns with the rook and the queen, maybe play a5, a4, move the king to a better square. So first he moves the queen, the h4 move, and a lot of shuffling. This was a nice plan of Magnus, because he kind of freezes these pawns, because they will get taken, so they cannot really move. Now they just shuffle their pieces a bit, making sure they don't hang the pawns. So there they go, a lot of shuffling. And here Fabiano goes for a plan where he takes this pawn on the side. And that's not a good plan, because of c6. The rook should have been in that file, and the queen should have been protecting the pawn, and that was a draw. Because he took this pawn, the rook isn't anymore in the c file, so you can push. Now the king moves up, and Magnus pushes the other pawn, because now he's threatening a lot of stuff. Also maybe this one, and pushing the rook. So if he pushes, Fabiano defends, there he takes, and this one will promote. So queen moves back, and the rook goes behind this pawn, threatening it to queen. The rook moves to the a file, and now the pawn falls. So now Magnus has these two really strong pawns, with the rook and the queen escorting them. and after rook a3 and queen e4, Fabiano resigned because a queen trade is forced, because it's pinned, so you can move the king because you lose the queen. And after takes, there's nothing you can do to stop. Because after this, there's this move. And if you make a king move, a queen, you have to take. A queen again. And move check to the king. And you will be up rook. And this is an easy win. If you look at the accuracy, really nice, really well played. Of Magnus, always such high accuracy, 96.8. Yeah, FE there were no chances for Fabiano at all. Magnus just was always a bit better. And here it was like +1 a long time, and then Fabiano blundered, and Magnus went on to win the game. Maybe this was his last classical win ever, because he said that he maybe wants to retire from classical chess. He did win the tournament, so congratulations to Magnus, and I hope I see you all in the next videos. And if you want to check out my other videos or subscribe, would really help. So thank you all for watching and have a nice